Um, okay, you think we have a quorum?
Yes, we do. We have everybody.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization Administration and Finance Committee to order. Can I have the fun stuff to read? I'm going to read the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice on the website. These are the meeting guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself and to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on either the participants button at the bottom of your screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar, and I will then call on participants. If you're on the iPhone, like Dennis, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Mr. Jonathan Church via the chat at jchurch@ctps.org or 857-702-3709 via phone. And I'll now read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AAA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation in order to fully participate in this meeting, please contact Jonathan Church, MPO staff, via the chat, by email at jchurch@ctps.org, or by phone at 857-702-3709. We'll now do introductions. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Kane. I'm the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board, a regional member of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, and I have the honor to chair the ANF committee. Derek, do you want to say hello, and then Eric?
Sure, sounds good. Good morning, everyone. Derek Cravat from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
And Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Good morning. Len, I don't know if you want to say hi, or Dennis.
Hi, Dennis Giambetti, representing Metro West Region and the city of Framingham. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Leonard Diggins, and I am not going to have the energy all day that you have in just the 5 minutes I've heard Brian.
Len, you're the inspiration. And if you want, I'll start singing Chicago songs.
Oh, wow. Wow. Nice.
Who else is on the committee? Bill Conroy, you want to say hi? You on the committee?
Yeah, good morning. Bill Conroy, representing Mayor Wu in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. We're also joined by a number of MPO staff. Let me welcome everyone and thank you for being here. We'll now move on to public comments. If anybody would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand function and we will call on you to make your comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to summary of meetings, which I think is a fancy way of saying meeting minutes. Jonathan, you want to take this one?
Certainly. So we have 2 sets of meeting minutes. What I'd like to do is I'll do a roll call for each set. So we'll start with the October 20 minutes. Can I get a motion?
Take a motion and a second first, Jonathan.
Yep. Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay. And I will do the roll call. Brian Kane.
Yes.
Eric Barassa.
Yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Yes.
Derek Cravat.
Yes.
And Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
And Bill Conroy.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll go on to the November 3rd minutes. Can I have a motion to approve?
So
Motion
moved.
to approve. Second.
So Dennis and
Dennis and Eric.
Eric. So I will go to Brian Kane,
It's Brain, actually, yes.
Brain.
According to the slide in front of me, yes.
Oh, we will fix that.
Trust me, it's a huge mistake. Trust me.
A Freudian slip if I've ever seen one.
Brian Kane, thank you. Eric Barassa,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes, but it's a huge mistake that it hasn't been used for now. That's all.
Dennis Giambetti,
Yes.
and Derek Cravat,
Yes.
and Bill Conroy.
Yes.
Motion
Never
carries,
has a
Mr.
name
Chair.
been so misplaced. Trust me. By the way, I also respond to Hara, Coke, and Candy. So all of those will work today. Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to move on to a discussion of the operations plan, draft tip process engagement, and readiness committee discussion. Tag and Deitch, Executive Director. This one's you, along with Ethan Lapointe.
Thanks, Brian. We asked Ethan to be here as well. I'll talk about this sort of proposal for what is probably also a mouthful still in terms of a tip process engagement and readiness scenario. But I also would love to be able to have Ethan speak up to anything if something comes up. Our hope is not to have this take up too much of the time on the agenda, because for our last conversation, I think the intent of this committee is to bring a feasible scenario to the policy board for discussion. So what we've drafted here is what we believe to be a feasible scenario for a TIP committee, which is sort of a technical committee that would not be making decisions around the TIP, but that would be providing supplemental kind of process and engagement around the TIP. So I will just very briefly summarize what's in the document, and I hope you took a look at it. And if folks need more time to take a look at it, please let me know. I know some of you reviewed it in advance, but the main purpose of this, if you scroll down to the top of option 1, is to increase or improve the transparency and engagement in the TIP development process. So this is really about engaging certain board members, particularly those that engage with their subregions, to kind of have more discussions and potentially build more consensus prior to policy board meetings around what certain questions or issues might be related to TIP project issues. So this would be probably something that would focus more on the municipal representatives, but I think that it would also be supported well by some of the state or regional representatives. So I know that one of the comments made by this committee is that it shouldn't be a committee that everybody on the board wants to be a part of. So I think that's part of the discussion that the policy board might want to have. And then the idea as we scroll through the kind of sample activities would be to engage in sort of a deeper dive in certain aspects of the TIP development process at different moments in that process. So for example, when our MOU says that annually the TIP criteria will be reviewed and discuss whether or not changes should be made, we don't really have that conversation explicitly at the policy board level every single year. In that sense, every year we bring, we re-summarize the criteria, but this entity could potentially have more of a discussion. It could be an opportunity to re-engage or educate for the first time people in a deeper way about what the criteria are and how they are, what data are applied to them, again, in kind of a deeper way than we actually talk about at the board meetings at this point. And then the committee, if they've had conversations that led to the idea that maybe an update would be useful, that could be brought to the policy board for discussion. And then it could be decided there whether or not an update was needed. Also, the next bullet, thanks. In terms of reviewing the universe development process, that's actually the way we develop the universe is there's a lot of process behind there. And again, it's not a process that we spend a lot of time talking about at the board. And for some, it may be a great way to engage some of the board members in conversations that will help them do better engagement and outreach in their own subregions to potential project proponents to sort of bring them into this universe. Similarly, when it gets to scoring, we do present the scores to the full policy board, but there could be a much more detailed and engaged back and forth conversation about why scores look certain ways that could happen at a committee level. Also looking at when we're developing the scenario, I want to be very clear here that the intent wouldn't be to layer in another review stage, because when we're developing the tip scenarios, those often need to happen relatively quickly. And they need to come to the policy board in a well-formed way. But a committee on an ongoing basis could be sort of a sounding board to provide some feedback on how those are evolving, if the timing works out relative to when the board meets. And then similarly, kind of a deeper dive throughout the whole year potentially around the different cost and readiness challenges that come up. They come up, we have amendments all throughout the year that have these kinds of challenges associated with them. And so if there was a way for a committee to spend a little more time and effort trying to identify the types of projects that have issues, what kinds of questions might need to be asked to sort of better understand those, and what work and engagement might need to happen with project proponents to help them actually work their projects through those challenges and issues. So that's the general idea. And Ethan was kind enough to put together quickly sort of a very simple diagram that shows the tip development process and some of these sort of points in time which a committee might be able to kind of support discussions around these. So starting with the universe kickoff timeframe, and then the scoring process and criteria, early scenario, and then the revision of the criteria for the next cycle. So kind of laying that out throughout the year, as well as the ongoing work on looking at project readiness and recurring themes and challenges around that. So in some ways, it would extend some of the conversations that we had in the ad hoc committee, but in other ways, it would be entirely different types of conversations. I do want to note that I put in a few, we put in a few other options towards the end here about other ways in which to maybe carry out this work. I want to be very upfront and say that I don't think that either of those two things would accomplish the same goal as having this more technically oriented committee. I think that the way we engage in RTAC is very important. I don't think that that replaces this concept that's option one. And I think we already do engage the board, and the intent is that it's meant to be supplemental. So I feel that if you want to bring this to the policy board, you should just bring the concept of the committee and probably remove these other options. But I wanted to be honest to the conversation we had last time where we talked, are there other ways in which to kind of do this kind of work? So that's the document as it stands now. If people have specific critiques or feedback, we can take those. If people feel like it's in a good place to go to discussion at the board level, the policy board level, we can talk about scheduling that conversation sometime in January.
Thanks, Tegan. I guess I'll say just to start, I really do see this coming out of the ad hoc committee that Eric chaired over the summer. And I know that did some great work and made some great suggestions. I see this as kind of the natural evolution of that. And I guess the example that I keep coming back to is when we were doing this last time, we wanted someone, I think we need someone other than John Bouchard coming at the very last second to say, this isn't ready. There needs to be a little more process around that just to kind of help everyone understand and not feel like it's kind of rushed in at the last second. And I see this technical committee as really being something that can help do that in a way that makes folks feel as if everyone is involved. And that's not to say that John doesn't do an amazing job with juggling lots and lots of information and wearing lots and lots of hats. It's just, I think, a little bit more of a process, but that's my personal opinion. Let's hear what the unwavering Len Diggins has to say.
Thank you, Brian. So I agree that the option two, I mean, isn't I wouldn't consider option two, even though I'm here being as advisory council's representative. I mean, it just isn't the right role, I think, for the advisory council. And for option three, I guess I would not. Yeah, I don't like option three as it is, but I would prefer an option where you could have meetings that would potentially contain all members of the board or any members that wanted to be a part of the meetings. So, and I know that earlier you said, Tegan, that we are wanting a committee that's not all the board. I'm kind of fine with that. And to that extent, instead of incorporating this into our regular meetings and thereby potentially having very long meetings, and I would be in favor of just having additional meetings, because any subgroup of the committee is going to have separate meetings by virtue of being being a member of this committee. And also, I think it gets us away from the notion of how do we determine who's going to be on the committee. I mean, if we just open it up to everyone, I mean, and so I think that would also kind of gauge the overall interest level. And finally, you know, I don't think I think it's probably better to evaluate the criteria every 4 years, maybe in conjunction with an LRTP cycle. So as we do the needs assessment and we develop the LRTP, we might have a sense of the need to review our criteria, and then we can do that in the next year or two afterwards and go through a really robust and thorough process as we did the last time we reevaluated our criteria. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Eric, please go ahead.
Just a couple questions. I mean, I think overall the memo looks good, and I think, yeah, I think given the gravity of this recommendation, I think having that discussion with the full MPO board in January, I think is a good idea. Just a couple questions. Just looking at this timeline here, how many meetings are we sort of like? Are we proposing this committee would hold over the course of the year?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Eric. And I think that's to be determined. I waver a bit back and forth on the idea whether it's scheduled as needed or whether it should be established as a regular cadence throughout the year. I tend to feel that there should be some predictability around it so that it can support some of these type activities and be that forum where additional information can be brought. I think that's easier to do when it's predictable. So that might make it a monthly or something like a monthly or every other monthly meeting. I'm not sure.
Okay, I just want to be cognizant that, for most of the, municipal members and members of the MPO, the MPO is already, a fairly big time commitment to participate in, 2 long meetings a week or a month. And then, so I just think we should be thoughtful about that. This isn't necessarily in every month meeting, but maybe it's as needed during that sort of tip cycle, just to be. I can see that being an issue with some people thinking, oh, okay, here's another, meeting that I would need to participate in. And then does this memo, I didn't see it, but do we get at the membership of it? Like who decides who's on this? Is it the chair that decides?
So I actually think that this would wrap up into the operations plan with the other committees where we talk about how committee membership is established on an annual basis when there are new board members, that volunteers are sought out for who wants to participate in which committees. And then that would be the same process applied to this committee, just like every other committee. That said, we have not put anything in here around chairship of the committee.
Okay, so yeah, we can cross that bridge, but I think the memo looks good, and I think getting that, I think having that discussion with the full board makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. I agree. So does Eric or Derek, Dennis, does anyone, Len, you've already mentioned it, does anyone have any thoughts on items 2 and 3 at the bottom? I mean, I tend to agree with Len that once this goes forward, those other options shouldn't be part of it.
Yeah, I would agree that they seem like not real options. Like it's like we either do this or we do what we're currently doing kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine to take that off because I think if some people say, well, I don't know about this committee, but let's kick it to RTAC. Like I don't know if I would support that. So so I would say either let's just keep this memo and take those other options off of it. That would be my perspective.
So that seems to be what you, me, and Len here. Let's hear from Derek and then Dennis.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I agree. I think this option makes the most sense. I think it's definitely logical. I think the memo looks good. I did have a chance to talk a little bit with my bosses in OTP about MassDOT participation. And my takeaway from those conversations is, of course, I would participate from MassDOT at the actual meetings. If this were to go forward, I think some of the coordination with other MassDOT staff, though, I think it's safe to assume that that would kind of happen offline, and it would be maybe more regular coordination with other MassDOT folks, like in our highway division and right-of-way sections and things like that, folks that can weigh in on readiness. But I think as far as kind of meeting participation, it would be safest to assume that, I would be basically the MassDOT representative, and I could do some background coordination with others ahead of these meetings and use this as sort of that forum. But just, as far as expectations of kind of other folks from MassDOT, I think it's best to just assume it'll just be me, but that doesn't mean I won't come with information from other people. But I don't want to commit other folks at MassDOT to participate, and was told that, that should be made clear to folks that it can't be guaranteed that others at MassDOT would be able to participate in the actual meetings. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Derek. Understood. Mr. Giambetti?
Thank you, Brian. One quick question, if I could, is one of the charters of this committee to actually look at each project scoring, or is it just the scoring criteria?
Yeah, Ethan, feel free to jump in as well, but I think our intent here was to suggest that this committee have the opportunity to look at the scores deeper for each project if they so choose.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yep. Okay, it'll be interesting to see how, we bring this forward to the full committee. My gut tells me is that they're gonna push us to a plan B. It's just my sense. So we may not want to present a plan B, but we may want to be thinking about if there is one, what would it look like? But I guess discussion at the meeting, at the board meeting, full board meeting, will kind of dictate where we go, if at all, anywhere.
Yeah, you're right, Dennis. I guess plan B is the status quo, where we keep making the sausage in the full policy committee, policy board, instead of at a committee level.
Yeah,
and if
my
that's
sense
the
is
desire.
Yeah, there may be a desire to even, go back to the old, do we do a tip day or a couple tip days, right, to bring everybody into the full board, right? Which is, I'm not sure if that's going to be a plan B for them or not, but that's, I could see some people articulating that, right?
Yeah, you're right. And I guess, Eric, you're our resident historian on this. You can tell us more the details, but I think the concern is that there's so many projects, and that on tip days, folks only had a couple of minutes per person. Maybe with a committee of folks that have a little bit more time, to sort of be there, you could do this over a couple of days and make it more substantive. But Eric, I don't want to speak for you. Please go ahead.
No, Dennis, I hear you, and I think what you're echoing is just like the fact that this is like another thing where there will be people will feel like, well, I want to participate in this, but if it's going to be like a lot of meetings, it's like a big time commitment. And so is it better to try to do something where we could try to address some of these issues, but in, I don't know, like one long meeting or something like that. And I don't know, like this is what I struggle with, where I think a lot of people are going to want to be a part of this. And of course, these are going to be, even if this is a committee, this is going to be a public meeting, and so any member can show up. And I don't know, I think the content here is I think like this, carving out more time to discuss some of the process and hear about project readiness, I think is like the content here is important. And we like this, I feel like this is the way to do it that is respectful to people. You know, in terms of not having, you know, super long meetings. I think that like we're trying to find this, you know, we're trying to strike this balance here. And I don't know, you know, this, what I struggle with is yeah, I think what we're going to hear from people are like a feeling that this is going to be another set of long meetings that they have to participate in. But I feel like we need to kind of push back and say, yeah, but we need to do this because we're not getting enough information and like there's not enough discussion about projects. And this is the way to, I think, address some of those issues. But Dennis, I'd love to hear more what you think, like the sort of
Yeah, my sense is going to come. My sense is going to come down to a balance in where one weighs loss of control versus loss of time, right? In the sense of having more time to go through a much more deep dive, right? And it depends on where you're willing to sacrifice. I think those are the two dimensions. And there's going to be some members who are not going to like the loss of control over, you know, having more direct input into the project. And there's going to be other people who don't want to spend as much time on it, right? I think that's it.
Yeah, it's the age-old debate, right? Time versus quality versus quantity. But yeah, I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it would be helpful if we bring this to the policy board and have the discussion about it. So, Dennis, is your hands?
Yeah, I said one more comment.
Please.
That I think there's going to be some discussion on maybe spending more time on the TIP process and project in lieu of other things. So it's not entirely additive or incremental time, but maybe there's other things that we do that may be looked at differently, right? And maybe have a subcommittee do some of those things as opposed to the TIP. It comes down to, you know, the importance of some of these decisions that we make. That's another alternative that I think people may highlight.
Absolutely. Mr. Leonard Diggins.
Well, that's an interesting comment, Dennis. I'm kind of wondering, are these just generally the ideas and your objections? If so, that's quite all right, you know. And my thoughts are, I mean, you have 4 to 6 loudmouths here. I mean, the other 2 are David Muller and gosh, we just mentioned his name. Starts with a B. You know, it's a guy from MassDOT. You know,
Brian Brain.
No. It's BE. He chimes in the last minute with whether the projects are ready or not.
Bashard?
Bashard, yeah.
Okay.
So I think those would be the 2 that might have some objections that we haven't heard at this point. You know, I mean, we may hear others, but I think I'm inclined to just kind of push through, meet the objections, with intellectual integrity. I mean, if they have a good point, then we listen to it and adjust. But other than the statement that you made, Dennis, about maybe deprioritizing some things so that we could prioritize TIP stuff in our regular meetings, I think the other arguments just won't carry today. That's it. Thank you.
Hagen. Did we lose Tegan?
No, I didn't realize I was still muted. Thank you. I've been listening to these comments and I just had a few more things to offer for you all. So we did pay careful attention in our conversations and preparing this document to not have this be about control. That this committee is not supposed to take that away from the policy board. I don't think that makes that real for everybody. You know, it's hard to trust that wouldn't be the case. But the idea is to get better engagement and actually also to bring more people into the TIP process, because if we have sub-regional reps, another better understanding what the challenges are in terms of engaging the TIP process, there's this engagement component to it. So there is not any built-in decision-making in this structure at this point. So I feel, staff has no intention of proposing that. In addition, I did share this in advance after talking with Brian and Eric. I shared this also with David Mueller in advance to make sure that he, as the chair, had a chance to sort of process it before it came to the full board. So it won't be, kind of a surprise or an instant, kind of reaction. You have time to think through this and process this. I do think that the information is key here, that if information doesn't come to this committee, it's hard to have anything more than a circular conversation. So in thinking about the ad hoc committee, one of the things that was very successful about it is having a few other MassDOT voices there that we don't always hear. So I would just advocate that you all consider what information you might want to sort of push for and have that be a forum for having some of those conversations. And then lastly, I think before we share this with the board, we should probably add two things into the memo. One is a proposed sort of timeline or structure for when the meetings meet so that there's something to react to there. So it's not just open-ended in terms of time commitment. And the other was, I think I lost my thoughts on that one. Oh, we can add in what we've drafted up as the process around membership for committees in the ops plan. We can sort of add in an intro on that, but this is how it would be established.
Nice. Look at you connecting all the dots.
Trying. It's when my brain does work.
So it sounds like there's general agreement that this should at least move forward for consideration by the policy board without the second options, the 2 and 3 options. Tegan, I like your idea of putting a memo with some context around it. I think this will be a good discussion, and at the very least, it'll give us a sense of where the full board is relative to kind of where we are. So I feel like we're ready to move on, but I definitely want to hear from Brad Rawson.
Good morning, Brian. Thanks, team. Great discussion. I'm taking good notes here and look forward to briefing Tom Bent. One question that comes into my mind comes from Tegan's last statement there about the relationship with the ops plan. Can staff please expand on the timing here for those of us who haven't been as closely in the weeds as the core committee? How does this committee's recommendation flow into ops plan to LRTP, to other core activities that we forecast for calendar 2023? And specifically, how are our federal partners going to react to all of these dynamics? Thanks.
Brian, would you like me to try to answer that?
Absolutely.
Brad, I may need you to follow up on whether this fully answers your question, but this particular proposal for a committee, if we wanted to have a conversation at the policy board level to determine whether there was buy-in before including it in the ops plan, the ops plan actually lays out the different committees that the board has. And so this then gets transferred into that. If we keep on our schedule, we should be able to present a full draft of the operations plan to the board. We're now looking at probably more like March. Depends. As we have longer conversations on topics, it pushes it out a little bit more. But at that point, the full policy board would be able to discuss the entire document and decide whether to approve it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Tegan, that answers part of the question. Thank you. But maybe you and Ethan can then help us connect the dots with the TIP process that will really be, happening in earnest in that kind of same overlapping time frame of March to June.
Yeah, Ethan, would you like to talk about March to June?
Yeah, thanks, Tegan. So as far as the March to June timeline goes, that's the main lift for when projects are evaluated for a bundle in a scenario based on what the MPO's knowledge is of funding availability. As far as where this committee would come in that process, right now, we would tentatively have something likely in early March, right when we have a better idea of what the scores for those projects are and the funding availability and project readiness updates are, to start looking a little bit more closely at the draft scenarios. The current timeline of the MPO committees and where those meetings are scheduled at this time are more conducive, I would say, to a more broad objective level analysis of what a scenario accomplishes. For example, mitigating the possibility of cost increases, allowing contingency, et cetera, but not so much an individual view of each of the projects incorporated into that scenario given time constraints. This is more to kind of do that granular level lift in this period between March and June, where scenarios are developed, draft the draft tip is submitted for public comment, and also as part of that public comment lift, evaluating what kind of feedback we're hearing from municipalities prior to that endorsement on June 1st.
Brad, does that answer your questions?
I mean, it's a step in that process, Brian. Thank you. And sorry if it's elementary stuff.
Not at
But
all.
you know, Dennis asked a good question about Plan A and Plan B. And so I'm just trying to make sure in my head, representing 20 intercore cities and towns, how we communicate with our sub region membership. What happens in a Plan A scenario, what happens in a Plan B scenario, trying to be respectful of limited staff time for all project proponents and folks, you know, on the elected side who are trying to build coalitions for these projects. So this is helpful, and I appreciate everybody's forbearance here.
Well, given that you were up at like 4 o'clock in the morning earlier this week, I'm amazed you're even with us. So please know that your questions are always spot on, and we much appreciate your involvement here. I think we should move on to the next item on the agenda, assuming I think we have kind of a consensus here. Tegan, Gina, et cetera. Do you all feel like you kind of get a sense of where we're headed?
Yeah, I think we'll just follow up with some edits to the memo, and you know, we can either then finalize that and share it directly with the board, or we can run it back by you, Brian, just to kind of confirm that you feel like it captures it.
Awesome.
And then it would go to the board.
Cool. Why don't we move on to number 5? Rain again. Discussion and action of the operations plan with respect to resolutions or resolves, as this memo makes it clear. Tegan, you want to take this one, or is this one me?
I think we assigned this one to you. I know you reviewed this, but I think the main intent here is just to more specifically define something that we hadn't defined in our earlier drafts. And one of the requests that this committee had was, let's actually say what a resolution is, because sometimes the board does them, but I'm not sure anybody fully has a common understanding of what they're intended to do. So it's brief. It's more to get your confirmation that you feel this captures it.
Right. So, I mean, the important stuff here is that we acknowledge that these are non-bindings. They're a sense of the Boston Region MPO. I don't believe in Robert's rules there's a prohibition on when they can and can't be proposed. We should check that, actually. I don't have my copy with me. I think that they require a simple majority. I think that's clear. I guess one thing when I saw this that I wanted to add is that I think the resolution in total should appear in the meeting minutes of the next, when those are presented, sort of as at the back, so it's clear what it was the resolution said and what everyone thinks it said is clear. So I would ask that be added. Just like I said, put it in full at the back. And this also gets us to the question of who it goes to. So this makes it clear that it goes to the secretary and the CEO of the agency or municipality that the resolution affects. I would also add the MPO board member representing that subregion and the representative of that municipality on the MPO board, if there is one, if that makes sense. Just to try to close that loop. But that's, again, my thoughts. Eric, what do you have to say?
So I think it's great to spell this out. My, personal opinion is like, I think the MPO should do these, should be very judicious. I would hate to see a situation where this sort of is opening the gates to people wanting to do lots of resolutions all the time. And I do think we should sort of stay within, the focus of the things that the MPO has, the most control over. But I think spelling this out is good because this comes up, every now and again. I don't think you can put anything in here that says like, don't do this too often. But I think we should be clear that that this requires like a motion and a second, right, type situation. And then the other thing here is that if we ever do want to say something where the focus is on some action in the legislature, should we make sure that you know, the resolution goes to like the appropriate, you know, people there, or how, you know, I don't know how to, I'm just raising that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Eric. So maybe just at the last sentence, when we're adding in other folks, and just put something like, and the appropriate, other appropriate individuals as needed. Give ourselves some leeway. That's what I would suggest anyway. Eric, you good? I see Tegan's hand is up.
Geez, keep going to mute myself. I have a quick follow-up question to both what you, Brian, and Eric said about kind of the appropriate other parties. So if we take a specific example, like the Green Line extension related letter around doing the environmental analysis, is the, you know, that was the board asking the secretary to move forward with something that had been committed to. That's the most recent resolution I remember. What does that mean in terms of the other relevant parties? I understand it. Does that mean the inner core representative, and then any municipalities that are affected by this further extension? Or what does that, can you translate that a little for me?
I think it's open-ended, and I think for the operations plan, it should be somewhat open-ended to give leeway to the resolution proposer as well as the board presider, in this case, you know, David, to kind of figure that out. I mean, it's sometimes with these regional issues, there isn't a clear CEO or a clear decision maker. So I think it's subjective, and I think that's okay. You know, to Eric's point, if it's to the legislature, we'd send it to the speaker and the Senate president. If it's, you know, the Green Line, you'd CC, or you'd give it to the GM of the T and probably a bunch of other people. So I like leaving it open-ended, and I know that that's probably an insufficient answer for you folks who have to write this into words. But that's what I'm thinking anyway. Maybe
I think
Leonard
that's
Diggins
okay.
can help us understand this.
I'm sorry. Did you say something, Brian? I was.
Your
listening.
hand is up.
Oh,
so-
yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. For some reason, I just didn't hear exactly what you were saying, even though I really was listening, paying attention. Anyways, so I understand Eric's concern, and I share it, and I'll just admit from the top, especially given my experience in town meeting, they have a bit of a negative posture towards resolutions. But to the extent we're going to allow them, if it does get out of hand, we can always have a non-binding resolution to not have non-binding resolutions. And the only other substantive thing I have to say is on point 1.2, I would drop the last 4 words "do not become laws," because there's nothing that the MPO does that becomes a law, so they're just non-binding,
Oh,
but-
just for clarity,
Yeah.
the first part, the general definition,
Yeah.
is not meant to be, so the resolutions of the Boston Region MPO, I think that's the core content here. So yeah, we'll make sure that there's no reference to law, because as you say, absolutely. that's not
Yeah,
the issue.
all right, that's it. Thank you.
I agree, Len. I think, and to Eric's point, I think as well, these should be fairly rare, and I think they are now. We don't go overboard. Mr. Brad Rawson, please.
Yeah, I'm glad Tegan mentioned the Green Line to Route 16 resolution. Obviously, we're super excited about this week's milestone with GLX1, but we do want to make sure that stakeholders, including the MPO board, do not forget the resolutions that we made, the promises that were given. And, remember that GLX2 is more of an Arlington and Medford thing. It's not a Somerville thing, but I think it illustrates that larger tension. If the body is going to make resolutions, understanding they are non-binding, do they just get kind of filed on a dusty shelf? Is there any reporting mechanism? Is there any sort of end of year report where we can track and see if we as a board, we as staff, we as a region have followed through on these things? And maybe that helps either limit or control those tendencies for kind of spurious or shallow resolutions, and really helps us focus on the big impactful things. I would argue that moving $150 million from GLX2 to GLX1 is one of those big impactful things.
It's all about the Green Line, Brad. It's all about the Green Line. No, I agree. And I think the reporting mechanism is very important. One thing that we often struggle with in the town in which I live is there's often talk of sending a message. And I often ask, well, who does the message go to and how will they know it's been received? And this is important here as well. And I also think with respect to making these things kind of rare and more effective that way, there's also going to be an onus on folks like Eric and me that have been around a little bit longer and can spend a little more time to kind of make sure that these things are not as are not sort of willy-nilly. But yes, Brad, I think you're absolutely right. And I guess, Tegan, one of the things that I would suggest we include in here is kind of in addition to putting it in the minutes, if we could do some kind of an annual collation of them all, and have that, if there is in some sort of an annual report or a wrap up or something, if we could just sort of include those in that, even if it's just on the website and it's and a link is sent to folks. I think that would be helpful. Derek, Dennis, Bill, any questions, comments, concerns about resolutions? I like,
No.
If anyone puts a resolution to not have resolutions, I will be revolted.
Not binding, of course.
I'll hold my comments to a later date.
Thanks, Bill.
All right.
Your comments will be non-binding. Okay. Tegan, you feel like you got a good sense of where we're at on that? Please go ahead.
I do, and I just wanted to make a comment on the next agenda item when we move, because of the
let's do it.
time.
Let's do it.
So we were going to go through and summarize the feedback we heard and kind of any modest changes that we made, but I think we're very short on time. And again, staff need 5 minutes at least transition to get to the MPO meeting. So what I was wondering is if it might make more sense for us to send some kind of a written, summary of what we heard and share the document with the modest changes and then try to confirm this at the next time we meet. We did not make major substantive changes. We think this process is relatively well established compared to a number of years ago and is working pretty well. So we don't feel that there's anything, contentious embedded in this, but I think we're just running low on time, and so we don't have time to go through the whole document right now.
Yeah, I agree. I've reviewed it. I don't think it's radical or at all unresponsive to what our sentiments in the past have been. Can we put this at the top of the next agenda just to kind of approve, or would you like us to kind of bless it now?
I think we could put it at the top of the next agenda because I want to give everybody time, if you haven't read through it in advance, to read through it, and we could maybe send a note or a communication summarizing for you what you should pay attention to, and then just get back to it at the next meeting.
Works for me.
Does that work for you, Jonathan?
Else?
I know you were going to talk to this one.
That actually works well. I have a summary that I can provide as well, and I can get that out to everyone.
Fantastic. Member items? Anyone have any member items? Seeing none, when is our next meeting scheduled for? Haha, look at that. January 5th, 2023 at 9 o'clock in the morning. We will reconvene then. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Leonard Dickens.
Without objection, we are adjourned. See y'all in 10 minutes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.